Why knowing changes everything? What if the difference between trying and manifesting was knowing? What if the very thing you've been struggling to achieve, the reality you've been reaching for, wasn't delayed because it's difficult, but because you're still unsure it can be yours? The masters of the Far East didn't believe they could heal, multiply food, or walk on water. They knew they could. They didn't hope for divine power. They lived from it. They didn't see themselves as separate from the source. They walked in unity with it. This shift from belief to knowing is what made the impossible their normal. It's not blind faith, it's not guesswork. It's the deep, lived recognition that thought, when aligned with divine law, is creation. And today we'll explore how you can begin to make that same shift. By the end of this video, you'll understand how to move beyond hoping and start creating from inner certainty, the way the masters did. If this message resonates with you, subscribe now and walk with us through these timeless teachings. Your transformation begins with remembering who you truly are. Belief versus knowing. What's the difference? To understand the power of the masters, we must first understand the difference between belief and knowing. Belief is often born from the mind. It hopes, it wants to trust, but it still leaves room for fear. Belief can say, I think this will happen, or I believe this is true, but underneath is a quiet whisper. What if it's not? It's the step before confidence. It reaches, but it doesn't rest. It looks outward for validation, for signs, for proof that it's safe to trust. Knowing, on the other hand, doesn't reach, it rests. Knowing is not formed in the intellect. It arises from a deeper place, from direct spiritual awareness. It doesn't need evidence because it stands in alignment with truth itself. Knowing says, it is wow, and walks forward without hesitation. The masters never asked, will this work? They never pleaded with heaven, hoping something would appear. They affirmed what already was, and reality followed suit. As Baird T. Spalding records in Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East, they never said if. They spoke the word, and the word became flesh. The word they spoke was not laced with uncertainty. It was grounded in knowing. They were not spectators hoping for miracles. They were co-creators, speaking from oneness with divine law. And this is the path we are called to walk, not one of fragile belief, but of quiet, unshakable knowing. How the masters cultivated knowing. The masters did not arrive at this deep state of knowing by accident. It was not given to them at birth, nor was it taught in books. They cultivated it intentionally, patiently, and consistently. Their first tool? Stillness. They knew that truth cannot rise in a noisy mind, so they turned inward, not to escape the world, but to return to the source within. They practiced deep silence where the voice of fear fades and the voice of truth is heard clearly. It was in that inner sanctuary that they no longer believed they were divine. They experienced it. Next, they lived in perfect alignment with divine law. To them, divine law was not something to worship from afar. It was a living principle, a current they stepped into. They studied the nature of thought, of energy, of cause and effect, and they brought their lives into harmony with it. In doing so, knowing became natural. It wasn't something they had to force or remember. It became who they were, and then they acted, not from hesitation, but from absolute clarity. When they turned water into wine, it was not a performance. It was an expression of harmony with truth. When they healed the sick, it wasn't a test of faith. It was a quiet command from one who knew the spiritual body to be whole. When they walked on water, they weren't defying laws. They were walking in alignment with a higher one. As Spalding writes in the Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East, they knew and spoke the word, and the word became flesh. That knowing, spoken as word, became creation. It is a knowing born in stillness, grounded in harmony, and expressed through unwavering faith in universal truth. And you and I are not excluded from this knowing. It is waiting within us right now in the silence. Why belief alone fails to manifest? Why is it that so many people believe and yet nothing changes? Because belief by its very nature often carries with it a shadow. It's the silent battle between faith and fear, between I believe and but what if? This is the conflict of dual thoughts, and it's this internal contradiction that dissolves the power of manifestation. The masters knew this well. They understood that if you hold two opposing thoughts, they cancel each other out. A single flame of doubt can extinguish the fire of faith. You may affirm abundance, but if you're secretly fearing lack, that fear is also a prayer. You may speak words of healing, but if you're watching for signs of failure, you're also feeding the illness. This is why belief alone so often fails. Because beneath belief, there is still searching, still waiting for proof, still hoping the world will give you permission to trust. But knowing doesn't need confirmation. It doesn't wait for signs. It is the sign. Knowing arises when we stop clinging to outcomes and start living in truth. It requires surrender. Not surrender to fate, but surrender to the absolute reliability of divine law. The masters did not think, "I hope this works." They acted from the certainty that it already had. In the moment you let go of the need to be reassured and choose to stand in what is, your energy becomes focused, your thoughts become clear, and your reality begins to respond. Knowing is the absence of struggle, and in that stillness, manifestation becomes effortless. Daily practices to move from belief to knowing. Moving from belief to knowing isn't a sudden leap. It's a practice return. The masters didn't wake up one day with divine certainty. They trained their minds, refined their thoughts, and anchored themselves in spiritual truth day after day. So how do we begin? Start with affirmative prayer or silent command. This is not pleading or begging. It is the quiet statement of what is. Speak not from desire, but from realization. It is so. Say it not to convince the universe, but to affirm your alignment with it. This practice reprograms the mind to stop asking and start declaring. Next is embodiment. Begin to live today as if your desire is already real. If you knew your healing was complete, how would you move? If abundance was yours, how would you speak, walk, and give? The masters didn't wait for proof to show up before they acted. They acted because they knew. Then anchor yourself daily in stillness meditation. Even 5 minutes of silence can shift the entire day. Not to think, but to listen, to rest in that sacred space where truth speaks without words. In that silence, knowing will rise. It always does. And finally, practice visual discipline. Do not allow your mind to drift into the opposite of what you know. If you are holding a vision of health, do not entertain thoughts of disease. If you are affirming peace, do not indulge in fear-based narratives. The masters were strict with their inner gaze. They saw only what aligned with truth. And because of that, the world around them had no choice but to reflect it. These are not rituals of belief. They are acts of remembrance. Through them, you don't try to become powerful. You remember that you already are. Real-life examples from the book, throughout life and teaching of the masters of the Far East, we are given profound moments where the line between belief and knowing becomes unmistakably clear. In one account, a disciple earnestly attempts to replicate the acts of a master. He had observed the master speak a word, and bread appeared. So with full intention, the disciple speaks, but nothing happens. Confused and discouraged, he asks, "Why does it not work for me?" The master responds, not with rebuke, but with clarity. "Because you still believe it might not." His words reveal the heart of the matter. Belief always leaves room for the opposite. Belief still waits for confirmation. It still asks, "Is this real? Will this work?" But when the master steps forward, he speaks with no hesitation. He does not ask, he does not wish, he declares. And the result follows immediately and without resistance. Because in his consciousness, it is already done. Another lesson is given inside one of the ancient temples, where the masters speak about mind mastery. They taught that when one's thought is pure, clear, and undivided, it harmonizes instantly with universal law. But they warned, the moment doubt enters, the power of thought weakens. Like ripples in still water, even the smallest wave of uncertainty distorts the reflection of truth. One master described it this way: thought is the arrow, knowing is the bow that sends it straight. You can craft the most perfect thought, the clearest intention, But without the focused force of knowing behind it, it falls short. It's the certainty, not the effort, that brings the unseen into form. There is also the story of the group facing a seemingly impassable body of water. Some waited, uncertain whether to proceed, but one master stepped forward, not because the conditions were perfect, but because his knowing was. He walked, and the water supported him. He did not overcome nature. He aligned with a higher law that responds to those who are sure. The book reminds us again and again, these are not fantastical stories meant to inspire awe. They are living lessons, demonstrations of what becomes possible when thought is unified with knowing. And these lessons point to a single truth. You do not manifest what you hope for. You manifest what you know to be real. The masters didn't possess powers you lack. They simply removed what obscured the truth and lived from it. How to cultivate knowing in your life. The power of knowing isn't reserved for a chosen few. It is a spiritual ability that can be developed, strengthened, and embodied by anyone who is willing to walk the inner path. But like any great truth, you must begin where you are. And the masters taught that the smallest shift, when done in full awareness, carries the greatest power. Start small. Choose one area of your life to apply complete, unwavering trust. It may be your health, a relationship, your finances, or your sense of peace. Ask yourself, what would it look like if I truly knew the situation was already resolved? Hold that image. Speak from it. Act from it. And when fear arises, don't fight it. Just return to the stillness where knowing lives. Watch your words. Every time you speak, you are either reinforcing belief or expressing knowing. Avoid phrases like, I hope, I'm trying, or maybe one day. Replace them with statements of certainty. I am. It is. This already exists in the unseen. Your words are not simply reflections of your thoughts. They are creative instruments. The masters knew this and spoke only from alignment with truth. You can do the same. Anchor in silence. Knowing doesn't come from endless thinking. It comes from remembering. And remembrance lives in silence. Create space in your day, even just 5 minutes, to close your eyes, quiet your breath, and reconnect with your divine center. It is in the stillness that you stop seeking and begin knowing. And finally, affirm your identity as one who already knows. Say it aloud. Write it. Let it become your internal compass. I am one with divine knowing. I see what is already mine. Repeat this not to convince yourself, but to reveal to yourself what has always been true. With time, these small acts form a great shift from belief to unshakable knowing. And in that state, you begin to live as the masters lived, not hoping, not striving, but creating. Conclusion: the power you've always had. Here's the great secret the masters revealed. Not with pride, but with peace. You were never powerless. You were never separate. And the knowing you seek, it was never out there. It's been within you all along, buried beneath layers of doubt, noise, and false identity. Knowing is not some mystical gift reserved for the few. It is a return to your natural state, the way you were created to live. You don't need to become more to access it. You simply need to become still enough to remember it. So here is your challenge. This week, stop believing, start knowing, start becoming. Choose one thought, one intention, one truth, and hold it. Not as a hope, but as a fact. Speak it, embody it, live from it, and watch how the world begins to respond. Not because you forced it to, but because you finally aligned with what's always been. If this message awakens something in you, like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. What are you ready to know today? And don't forget to subscribe for more teachings from the masters. Your path to mastery starts now, and we're walking it together.